Today's, actually this morning, is a great pleasure to be able to interview and record some of the history of Bob Mills. Bob's a longtime resident of Red Deer. He's had many different adventures in his life, and I look forward to hearing them. But perhaps even just as importantly, Bob and his family have been working on putting some of his stories and recollections down in print, compliments, and particularly of his daughter and granddaughter. So I look forward to hearing some of those real life stories, and then we'll talk about our background in due course. Behind us is Slack Slough, one of the favorite spots of my father, coming into Red Deer and looking after the slacks in his office. Right. So it has some historical passing memories for me. Bob, to get started, do you want to tell us a little bit about your family and how your family came to Red Deer?
Sure. I was born in Young, Saskatchewan, which is 60 miles south of Saskatoon.
That's not the province, that's the town?
That's the town, yes. And basically it was a small town, went to school there. My father passed away when I was 12, and my mother was a nurse, so we moved to Saskatoon. And so she was a head nurse at City Hospital in Saskatoon for 25, 30 years.
Really?
And loved nursing. That was her passion. Yeah. And so she had graduated from the University of Saskatchewan. And
to reach those positions, you have to be a model nurse.
Well, she was very dedicated. I remember many, many days someone wouldn't be there and she'd fill in for them, and she put in many, many hours and loved her job of nursing. Yeah. I'm not sure that all the other nurses liked her as much as the doctors did, but the number of compliments she got from doctors was really tremendous. And then I went to the University of Saskatchewan. I was in pre-med. My father always said, "You've got to become a doctor," because that was his desire. He wanted to be a doctor, but had to go and work in the family business. So I started in pre-med, and then I guess how you look at it, you look back, but I was offered a free scholarship in biology if I would go into biology, and so I had free tuition.
But that wouldn't have come just as an offer. That's because you had demonstrated an interest in biology?
Well, yes, I guess that was the thing, and so I had to make the choice, stay in pre-med and look at big loans and a lot of money, or have a free scholarship in biology and work for the Canadian Wildlife Service. And so obviously that was my choice, and I graduated in biology, and then went to work for the Canadian Wildlife Service for a very short time, and they had a program where they were going to send their biologists off to Africa. Well, for a 20-something-year-old to go to Africa at that time just wasn't in my cards, so I decided to go back to university, and I got an education degree, and then was offered a job in Edmonton and Calgary, and came via Red Deer, and phoned the school board office on a Saturday morning.
On a Saturday morning?
Saturday morning, and Harold Daw was there. He was the superintendent of schools, and he said, "Well, we have a biology teacher who's retiring next year. What else could you teach?" And I said, "Well, history. I have a major in history. And so, well, come down and we'll interview you, and I'll call Wellington in, who's the principal of Lindsay Thurber." Half an hour later, I was hired in Red Deer.
Wellington's, of course, his brother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I never got to Edmonton and Calgary for my interviews, and stayed in Red Deer and have been here ever since. So
compliments of Harold Daw.
Compliments of Harold Daw.
Bob Mills.
And I was very pleased to receive the Harold Daw Award many, many years later. And,
right, from the college.
From the college, yes. So, so that was certainly an honor to have the guy that hired me and sent me down in Red Deer to have that award from him for him. And Wellington Daw and I became the very best of friends and spent many times on the Red Deer River, and in fact got petrified wood from the river where we would find it, and then we would go out in the winter with his car on the ice and retrieve our petrified wood. I have a piece in the front yard, and those were some adventures. How we didn't fall through the river, I have no idea. But that was my early first year in Red Deer, and from there, you know, I've been here ever since.
But tell us a bit about your teaching life, career, and years.
Well, I taught for 15 years, and I guess I've had many careers, so you know, that's to me been the best part of my life, I guess, is having all of these careers, and they've been very different and very diversified, but I can honestly say I loved every one of them. And so teaching mostly biology, first year, a lot of history, and then biology from there on, and taking over from Hugh Taylor, who was the biology teacher at the time. Right. And Ethel Taylor, of course, was the older woman, the counselor.
And that was that was his wife, of course.
That's correct. Yes. And so, so yes, I just experienced, I taught biology, took many students on field trips. We went to Fort McMurray, we went to the West Country every year, to Kananaskis, and did biology studies. I tried to get them involved in doing actual research work, and have all the papers downstairs that the students did. And they just did a super job of, and it was exciting for them, exciting for me. But as we talked, it would be something that I don't think biology teachers of today would have the opportunity to do, simply because it changed societal norms
and expectations, and
yeah. But those were exciting trips, and we had a guy like Slim Davis, who was a bushman from the West Country, and he would come along and help students identify various plants and animals and droppings and how old they were and tracks, and a great experience. And you know, when I do 50/50s for Rotary, I have people come up and say, "Do you remember me?" And of course, they're older people, and they say, "Yes, I was on one of your field trips." The thing is that most of these students tell me, "We remember the field trip, don't really remember the class, but we remember the field trip." So for them, it was exciting, and obviously something that makes me pleased that I was able to give them that experience.
Mm-hmm. What were there some other highlights from that? It was 15 years then that you taught, and this would be at all at Lindsay
All at
Thurber?
Lindsay Thurber, yes. And yes, I get, you know, the highlights were the students. I was, the first year, I was a football coach as well, and had played football. And so I guess the first year, it was, you know, a new experience for me. People about my age, in fact, we had some senior students at that time coming back to school. Right. So I had 35-year-old students, and this is for a 22-year-old, 23-year-old teacher, and that was an experience as well. And but the very first semester, because we were on the semester system, then very first semester, I had a guy come up and say, "I want to talk to one of your students." He was an obvious biker. And I said, "Well, my students are in class, and you're not going to talk to them." Well, I accidentally grabbed him by the chain that he was holding, and took him to the principal's office, and left him with Wellington to deal with. But that went down, and every student from there on knew about this. I had no discipline problems, zero discipline problems from that day on. And I attribute it to that kind biker who came to look for one of my students and didn't achieve what he thought he was going to. I'm not sure what Wellington did with him, but I was glad to get rid of him. So was the student that he was looking for. Other things I remember, we had a teacher who, the first day I came to Lindsay Thurber, I went into the staff room, and Miss Cook was the name of the teacher.
Janet Cook.
Janet Cook. And she grabbed me by the collar and said, students aren't allowed in the staff room, and took me to Wellington and said, hi, this guy came into our staff room. I was trying to tell her, she just told me to keep quiet, trying to tell her that I'd just been hired as a teacher. And but anyway, she took me to the office, and eventually we became very good friends. But that was an experience I'll always remember, being taken to the principal's office the first day in school. And I guess I looked kind of young at the time, so what can I say?
You know, she actually comes from quite a famous educational family. I know when I went to university and was trying to decide what path to follow, I ended up taking her brother's tests for aptitude and interest and so on, and they told me I should be a teacher.
Okay. Well, the only thing, she used to give Dixie cups to her class, and one time, no influence from me, one of my students, or several of my students, went in and actually removed the Dixie cups from her students' desks before they had arrived. And she accused me of having something to do with it, but of course I knew nothing about it. And but there were lots of stories, and Janet and I became good friends by the end of my tenure there and her tenure.
She was an institution.
She was.
But Bob, when your teaching time, I guess, it's not that it ended, it's just that you found something different, interesting, and motivating to do that took you out of education, and what was that?
Well, basically we were changing from a trimester system to a semester system, and I really believed in the trimester. It gave me 2 hours of class time with every class, and while that seems like a long time, it went very fast, and it let me really deal with the students. It let students come in for a 1/3, and they could go work on the farm in the fall and come back to class. There were a lot of advantages to the trimester. The school board decided to change that. I decided, well, maybe that's time for me to look beyond. And so at that point I said, well, what can I do that's different? And the travel agency, well, what had happened was we went to Disneyland, and the travel agent at the time didn't tell me that Disneyland was not at the airport. And I thought naively that I'd arrive there, the big mouse would be at the airport, and I would be all set. I had booked a hotel in Buena Park, and that was a long way from Disneyland. And so I learned that if I'd had a travel agent who had prepared me, I could have done much better for my family in terms of the trip to Disneyland, our first holiday. And so I thought, well, you know, if I was a travel agent, I'd want to tell people everything to prepare them for going on their trip. And so I decided that we would form a travel agency. It was a big gamble, and the first 3 months I was about $90,000 in debt with a second mortgage. And I was driving to Calgary every night to pick up airline tickets because we couldn't print our own. At IATA, we had to be IATA approved, and you had to have a certain volume and so on. So I would meet Air Canada people, Canadian Airlines people, and all the different airlines people in parking lots to get my tickets, pay for them, get my tickets, bring them back to Red Deer and deliver them door to door. And so it was every night to Calgary, and early mornings back home, and then back to work. So that was how we started Mills Travel. And of course I started setting up groups, and we grew from there to become one of the top 5 travel agencies in Alberta for producing for Air Canada and so on. So it all turned out well. A gentleman by the name of Harry Simper from Air Canada told me, you know, you'll be gone in 3 months. Like, you just can't come from nowhere and start a travel agency. And of course, my whole life, if someone puts a red flag in front of me, I'm going to succeed. You just tell me I can't, and I'm going to go for it. And it was a great experience. We had so many wonderful clients, so many parents of students, and it was just a great experience. And we did many, many groups. So I would fly to a place, set it all up, and make sure that everybody was prepared for what they were going to get through. And as a result, did an awful lot of travel, usually overnight, one day there, one day back. And like I say, was a fantastic experience.
But I particularly remember the time I went to Nepal, and one of the keys to that was your story, telling me about Lukla and the Lukla airport, and going into base camp and doing the Annapurna circuit. But it just shook me that here was somebody in Red Deer who'd been there and knew all about it from a personal experience.
Yeah, that was sort of my aim, like farmers from the Red Deer area would retire and had never taken a trip. And so I thought, what would a farmer like to see in another country? And of course, I picked on New Zealand and Australia, and I went and set up farm stays, went to auction marts and saw how they sold their cattle.
You mean in Australia?
In Australia, yeah, and went and saw how they sheared sheep, and so on. So then I set up farm tours
to pull the wool over the eyes,
so that people would be prepared. And then we were very fortunate to have friends who would agree to be the tour leaders. So I prepared them, and I remember going to Australia a number of times and being there for a day or 2 days just to get it set up for their group's arrivals. So, and for 15 years we went to Anaheim and San Diego with our Easter groups, and Nicole would take one bus and I would take the other bus from the airport and on the tours. And again, doing 50-50s for Rotary at the Rebels games, people come up to me and say, "Do you remember me? I was 9 years old when we went on a tour of Disneyland, and I still remember it." So those are the rewards that you get from doing that kind of service. So that was so much fun. I mean, and like I say, I've enjoyed every single job I've done, and certainly the travel business was no exception.
Were there a couple of other highlight trips that have left an indelible memory on you?
Well, going to Rwanda, and this was before the genocide there, and going to Rwanda and touring around and actually trekking mountain gorillas had to be a highlight. I took 39 rolls of film at the time and had mountain gorillas, had the silverback standing 8-9 feet tall, banging his chest within a foot of you is a very impressive thing. And certainly that was a highlight. Going down the Amazon, from the mouth of the Amazon, right where it began on a 150-year-old rubber boat down the Amazon, was just so fascinating. Going out in a dugout canoe with caiman all around you with red eyes and trying to take pictures and trying not to be too frightened. All of these were highlights of, and then of course my many visits to China, to Tibet, to all the provinces in China, and taking tours there, and ultimately setting up, becoming involved with American Express in China tours was exciting, to say the least. So many, many, many times in China, and setting up tours there, and I learned how to do it, and basically it was make sure you get the Communist Party guide on side, and help him do his reports back to Beijing of what you were doing, and Mao Tai was very helpful in that process. And I learned from Winston Churchill that if you put a towel around your neck and you toast Mao Tai after the first one or two, white lightning, that it accidentally gets into your towel, it's a way to get what you want in a tour in China.
Really? Is that something you drink as well?
You drink it, and I would say most people 3 ounces of Mao Tai, and you probably forgot your name. It's a very powerful liqueur,
The local vodka.
the local screech. If you're from Newfoundland,
Hooch.
yeah.
I'm from the Yukon.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Again, a fascinating experience and opportunity to, and later on, of course, to use the connections in places like China, so that I could, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But I can honestly say again, the travel agency, the people we met, how well the people of Central Alberta, and we started getting clients even from, I had a lady from New York, I had people from Los Angeles who would join a Red Deer tour group to travel to China, to Brazil, to wherever we were going. 15 years in the business, and it looks like I time things 15-year cycles. That was never the planning. That just happened to turn out that way. So sort of 15 is how it turned out in my life.
Well, let's talk a bit about the next 15. They're rather jam-packed.
Yes, well, I guess the first thing was that a gentleman by the name of Earl Beck contacted me and said, I'm a member of the Reform Party.
Is that Gloria Beck's father?
Dad. Yes, and we were good friends because of gardening, and so he phoned me and said, I'm part of the Reform Party with a lady by the name of Doris Jewell, and she we've talked about who might be a candidate for the Reform Party, and your name came up. And I said, well, I'm enjoying my business, and it would be a great change to go into politics. So I'm really not that interested. But Earl persisted, and along with Mary Wiseman, Doris Jewell, they put pressure on me, and so I had to convince my wife then that this would be a good move. She thought it was a stupid move, to put it bluntly. So we went on a cruise. The sole purpose was to convince her that this was a move that we should make.
Where did you go? It was so convincing.
It was a week cruise, and we had at our table we had a gentleman who'd been with the White Star Line, and he was a captain. And he heard about what we were discussing, and he also put pressure on Nicole that this would be a really great opportunity if you believe in community, and I talked about the future. I always talk about the future. To me, having a vision and the future is what it's all about. And we got back, and lo and behold, we got asked for dinner to Earl Beck's house, and guess what? He had a video of Deborah Gray giving a speech. And Nicole said, there's a woman that really knows what she's talking about. Maybe you should think about joining this Reform Party.
Well, that was at the time there were only a couple of them.
There was, well, she was the only elected member of Parliament. And so it went from there then, and with these ladies putting pressure on me now, I decided that I would take a run at it. Of course, at the time I was told I had no chance, and that was the red flag that said, okay, this riding has been conservative for a long time, and so Reform Party's not going to have a chance here. And so about a year and a half later, after I'd visited every door in Red Deer, I'm running, and in 1993, of course, the election of 1993, in the last 3 weeks before the election, I would go to a door, and they would have a Doug Fee sign, a progressive conservative sign, and they'd say, Bob, don't worry about that, we're voting for you. And door after door after door after door, I would get that same message. So I still felt I was an underdog. Everybody thought I was an underdog. And of course, the night ended, and we had 65% of the vote, I think it was the first time. And that became my next career.
And that was for an election to the House of Commons.
The House of Commons in Ottawa, yes. And so I should add that a very respected friend of mine, Preston Manning, also put pressure on, and Ray Speaker, who was a very, and had been an MLA.
The Social Credit Cabinet Minister, right, from
and
Bull Island.
He was a friend of mine. And so between the two of them coming to the House and putting pressure on, I had made the decision to run, and of course joined 53 other members. And the biggest regret of that whole thing was that the Bloc Québécois had 54 members. And so they were the official opposition by one. And I thought, here's a party that only represents one province. How can they be the official opposition to be ready to take over government? That's what the opposition is all about, and be from one province. So I developed a not so friendly attitude toward Bloc because of that situation. But it turned out fine. We became the official opposition in the next election. And the people of this constituency, which included Rocky Mountain House and was much bigger than it is now, had treated me just absolutely phenomenal. I couldn't even believe that you could be treated as well as I was. And
I mean, by
the constituents. It was amazing. In Rocky, one election, we got 94% of the vote. And it was funny because the first time I went to Rocky, they said, oh yeah, we'll see you in 4 years' time. You just come around at election time. You're one of those city guys that, from Red Deer, big deal. We'll never see you again. I made a point of being in Rocky every month and attended every event there, including axe throwing, getting dunked in the water tank, water out of the Red Deer River in the spring. And
not very warm.
It took me 3 days to warm up after that experience. And but just the people of the West Country treated me just unbelievable. It was, I attended many parades, did about 30 schools a year, and all the seniors' homes and all the industry. And I just got treated beyond any belief. I would go back to Ottawa and tell them how I was treated, and they wouldn't believe it. They just, they've been so good to me. It's just, I just couldn't say enough things about the people, the citizens of Central Alberta, and how I was treated as a politician. It was not how politicians are treated today. And so the time was right, I guess. And of course, the Reform Party ultimately became the Conservative Party, right, and morphed together, and that's a whole other, cycle. It was just great. Like, I would do events out there, and like I say, I just couldn't have been treated better. Mm-hmm. And I had to work hard though to beat Lou Soffit and Tai Lund in an axe throwing contest. And what I didn't tell them, because they had, like, I think Tai Lund had always won it. And I didn't tell them that I went out and got professional coaching for a week before, because remember, again, I don't like losing. And the red flag said, you can't throw an axe. And of course, I couldn't throw an axe until I got the professional training. And of course, I won the contest of axe throwing. So I always think of that. It was shocking to the people there. And I think some people at that point decided that I probably lived in Rocky because it was so much support. And the Liberal candidate at the time had his sign burnt down. So he called me and accused me of having arranged this. Well, of course, I knew nothing about that, but it became not very nice for other candidates to show up in places like Rocky and Caroline and so on, because they supported me so strongly. And I mean, it was exciting. It was, to go in a parade there was an amazing experience. And when some young guys who came to Ottawa much later said, "So you go on all those parades? You go on 30 parades a year? Like, isn't that degrading?" And I said, "No, that's touching the people."
Well, I mean, the keynote parade in the country is the Calgary Stampede,
Yeah.
and whoever heads it is a pretty significant person.
Yeah. No, I just, like I say, I just don't have a bad experience you know, of that whole process. And I mean, I was reelected 5 times. So.
Well, tell me about the other half of your constituency and how you became attracted to them and vice versa.
Well, I think the key thing was to be available. And the other key thing for me, and still today important to me, is that you have to have a vision of where you're going. You can't think in 4-year terms. You have to think long term. So I've always thought about, and certainly my environmental activities I've always thought you must think long term. You must think 25 years, 50 years, 100 years, what's going to be like. And I mean, that's the reason I belong to the Red Deer River Watershed Association, simply because we're talking about water, not just today, but water 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and how important it's going to be. And of course, that leads into the Rotary Project, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit later on, and Slack Slough, which hopefully, I'm hopeful, will become a focal point for people realizing how important the watershed, aquifers, and preserving our wetlands, because they feed the river. They feed the river.
Yeah. Bob, I think I was referring to your story when you were, I think, you were in Mills Travel, and you were giving presentations on travel. I think you called it chartered course.
Right.
On
right.
And how, just maybe you'd elaborate on that very interesting side story.
That was fun because a guy by the name of Lloyd Lewis, and Lloyd's still around, and Lloyd Lewis was the producer of this show called Charted Course. And we started out, well, it would be nice to have our local travel information and on various destinations. And so that's how Charted Course started. It went on for 8 years, and it was on RDTV on Sunday night at 9 o'clock. And then CFRN decided they would also have Charted Course on, and then a few other TV stations had that show on. And so all the people in the East Country, all they could watch was RDTV or CFRN. And so on Sunday night at 9 o'clock, whether they liked it or not, their only choice was to watch Charted Course. The funniest thing was, I was in Coronation, and someone rushed up, "Can we get your autograph?" And I, like, "What do you want my autograph for?" Like, why? And they said, "Oh, you're on Charted Course." and that just, so then I got the story everywhere I went, pretty much, was, I'd be introduced as, "This is the guy from Charted Course." And, so it became a real fun thing. I remember Lloyd and a camera crew going to San Francisco and us riding the cable cars up and down 10 times so they'd get just the right footage. And I spent most of my time just standing around because they would retake and retake and retake. And and I have all the episodes of Charted Course downstairs, but they're all in beta. And so to recover any of those Charted Course programs, while I have the beta tapes, I don't have them on, on a disc or something. So I think I could do that, but I don't know who would want to see them. it was a fun thing. It was fun. I had guests from all over the world, basically, and we would do a show on whether it was New Zealand or Australia or Brazil or Argentina or whatever. And you know, I've been lucky. I've been to over 100 countries, and experienced the culture of those countries, and got to know people in those countries, and that then led to my involvement in Globe International, which we can talk about later on as to my involvement there. But you know, just so many interesting things involved with the travel, with the teaching, and then the politics.
Well, let's go back to your political life. I'm thinking of some of the contacts you made, some of the arguments, presentations you were involved in, and perhaps some of the accomplishments you had as a not just for your constituency but nationally.
Well, my first, from 1993 till 2000, I was the critic for the Reform Party, ultimately the other parties, for foreign affairs. So largely that was because of my friendship with Preston Manning. And, you know, he's the smartest guy that I have ever worked with. I am never, you know, he's the best prime minister we never had. And just the brain power of this gentleman, I just can't even imagine describing it. And so as a foreign affairs critic, I would travel with the foreign affairs minister wherever they went. And that gave me some tremendous experiences, meeting some heads of state and so on, and allowing me to have a lot of input. And just yesterday, Bill Graham passed away. And Bill Graham and I traveled on, he was the foreign affairs minister. He and I traveled together many times. I remember being in Berlin when on a Remembrance Day, which was a strange thing, with Bill Graham. He and I were there, and we were talking about the EU and how it was going to work and so on. And I have so much respect for Bill. He was just a great person. My relationship with John Chrétien was much the same. And I guess my position was, when I'm in Canada, I'm a member of this party. When I leave the border, I am now a Canadian. And forget the partisan politics. It doesn't have a role in foreign affairs. And because they could care less what your party name is. They don't know, they don't want to know, it's of no importance. So a guy like Bill Graham allowed me to express myself, to be part of the conversation, to have input, and attending the COP meetings, the environmental meetings, conference of the parties for Kyoto and future environment. I was a member of that group for 15 years and got to go to all of the COP meetings and actually speak. The health minister, Mr. Rock, actually sent me to Switzerland to give his speech because he couldn't make it. And so I gave the speech to the UN on healthcare. And it was interesting because I had a prepared speech that I was to read, but I accidentally varied from the speech quite a bit. The bureaucrat that was babysitting me said, like, you didn't give the speech that Alan would have given. I said, well, no, because I didn't like some of the things that were in there and I wanted to do it a little different. So I get back to Ottawa. First guy I meet is Alan Rock. He said, you didn't give my speech. I said, no, because he said, actually, it was a way better than my original speech. And thank you very much for filling in for me. Some members of their party didn't particularly like the fact that I was, the Liberal Party didn't particularly like that I was, you know, doing this role as a Canadian outside the border. But they had to understand, like, there's no place for partisan politics when you leave your country. Like, that's all local stuff. And so I got to go to all the war zones and everything. I was in Haiti during the war, and the problems that they've had. I was in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India when they were having their conflict. I was in Bosnia, Kosovo, and actually was part of a United Nations team of 8 that were in Kosovo to negotiate the peace that ultimately happened there. So, you know, fascinating stuff. Like it was just great. Unfortunately, of the 8 of us, 3 didn't make it, and I got along great. I had a 16-year-old driver, and I had a 18-year-old lady who was the translator, and we drove in an old Toyota, and we covered the country during the war. And we just, it was just fantastic because I was invited to go into the basements of people's houses to taste their Slimovich, which is, again, white lightning. And I learned not to drink much of that stuff, but it was great. And I went to schools, and I will never forget, these were 12-year-old kids. And I asked them, so what is this war about? Why are you having this war? What will the future be like for you? And of course, they all wrote me little essays about answers to my questions. And what I learned was that hate is taught generation to generation. Some of them would describe, some of the Serbian kids would describe how Croats murdered 600,000 people. My grandparents were murdered, and they could describe it. And that was when they joined the Nazis, and you know, that whole period of 1941, 42. And so what I learned was, like, these are 12-year-old kids in 1998. So they had learned those stories from their...
Indoctrinated.
Yeah, so how do you ever get rid of sort of that world hatred when the kids have been taught that, and they could describe it to within a detail of the blood that was spilled. And I learned a lot from those 12-year-old kids that, boy, if we want to deal with world peace, which we all want, we're going to have to get rid of this method of indoctrination and so on. Parents have to think about what they're teaching their next generation. So I learned so much from that foreign affairs experience in those years. Mm-hmm. Traveling with Lloyd Axworthy to Colombia when there was a lot of riots and so on going on. The Shining Path in Peru, being there on a train getting shot at. Great experiences that taught me so much. Built the character that I guess I tried to teach my kids to have.
I guess the flip side of that is how did you feel, and how were you recognized internationally as a Canadian as opposed to from some other country? Was there any difference?
No, I think that we have a unique position. Canadians have a unique position. We're not big enough to be a threat to anybody. We have a reputation of being nice people, and we're not Americans. And there's a sentiment against Americans. Certainly now the Russians are experiencing that same sentiment of dislike and distrust. Canadians aren't that way. Canadians, I was asked sometimes to be chairs at a UN meeting because I was a neutral, considered a neutral party. And I remember once talking, it was in the European Union, and they were trying to decide, I don't even remember the issue, but there was a great conflict between Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and the rest of the EU. And so will you moderate this? Well, why was that? Because I was a Canadian. And so I had just so many experiences in politics. Then in 2000, I became the health critic for a year. So I said, well, the healthcare is in big trouble. We've got to fix this. So I visited the countries with the best healthcare. I visited France, Switzerland, Norway, the countries that really were achieving good healthcare. I learned that they used insurance. I I learned that they reward people if you don't overuse the medical system. In other words, you pay in X amount, and if you don't use it, you get a check at the end of the month or end of the year. That's there's incentives. I learned that they have ID cards. On that ID card, they have a chip put on when you're born. Here's where you were born, how you were born, etc. Then every time you see a doctor, another chip is implanted on that card. And so when you go into emergency, they don't ask you, have you moved in the last 2 hours? What's your phone number? What's your address? What's your contact? Zip through the card. Nurses don't have nursing stations. Nurses nurse. Doctors doctor. And they just use their chip. The bed is designed to take your blood pressure, your heartbeat, everything about what your body's doing, fluid intake and output. And the bed does the monitoring on a computer, which shows up. And so when the doctor comes in, zap, and he's got all the information. And I was in the emergency ward when a ambulance was arriving with a heart attack patient. And the lady came in crying. The husband was in distress. Zap the card. He was in the operating room a half an hour later. They had 8 MRIs, only 2 being used. And I thought, wow, like that. Here we would wait, I understand now, it could be 10, 12 hours just to even get seen by somebody, let alone have an MRI. I just had an experience where I waited 2.5 days to get an MRI at the hospital when I was having a problem. So, there are ways to fix the healthcare. I brought that back to Canada, and I was told that that's way too radical. It would never, ever sell in Canada. I said, well, when would it ever sell? The system has to get bad enough that you can look at these new options. So I was told by Stockwell Day, okay, you try this out at a convention. The nursing convention is in Ottawa this year. So I went to the nursing convention, and I can honestly say, I think probably the first 10 minutes there was disgust and almost booing. The next 10 minutes it was quiet. And then the last 10 minutes people asked questions as to, well, will this eliminate jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end, a nurse stood up and said, this would allow us to nurse and not have to try and read doctors' handwriting that we can't read, or the doctor wouldn't have to spend his time putting it in. We wouldn't have to have, this communication problem because it's all computerized. We'll get there, but it's just taking way too long. Like, we must fix our healthcare system. And so again, I learned that in 1 year as the health critic. Then I became environment critic, and that was, of course, where I kind of belonged, I guess.
You were still in the Reform Party?
No, this was now the Conservative Party. And ultimately, I became chair of the Environment Committee. I was vice chair for a few years, and got to moderate the party members. And I'd have to say that it was a difficult job trying to be the neutral party with partisan politics interfering with what should have been environment policy. Like, here's where we need to go. And of course, that's going to lead to your question about Kyoto and so on, because as environment critic, of course, I was expected to have a position for the party on things like Kyoto and climate change.
The Conservatives have been very conservative on that topic.
Yes.
How did you handle
the fish out of water?
How did you handle
I guess. Okay, so if we go to Kyoto, which was a major part of when I was as an environment critic, I was on holidays with my wife, who's Italian, in Italy, and I told the hotel manager, "Don't interrupt me. I'm not taking any calls. I promised my wife a week of quiet, no politics." The next morning, the manager came down and said, there's an important phone call for you. I said, but I'm not taking phone calls. He says he's the prime minister. Okay. So anyway, I took the call. I need you in Johannesburg tomorrow morning.
And you were in Italy.
And I was in Italy. So anyway, I talked to my wife and said, would you enjoy the holiday by yourself? Anyway, this happened to her a number of times, but this was the one time she really remembers. Anyway, so I flew to Zurich to Johannesburg, and met with Mr. Chrétien. And he said, why shouldn't I ratify Kyoto? So I had half an hour.
You were the conservative
Yes.
rep, and he's, of course, the liberal
Yes.
prime minister.
Yes, but
So why would he be coming to you?
because David Anderson was the environment minister. I was David Anderson's critic. He wanted to hear both sides. So David Anderson had told him why he should, and I had told him why he shouldn't. And the reason was not that we shouldn't not that we shouldn't deal with climate change, but if you promise to do this, you can't achieve it. You're going to get a black eye. And of course, it turned out that was true. But at the time, we each had an opportunity.
A lot of euphoria.
So we were in the chamber. There were 88 leaders of countries there, and this was the anniversary of the whole climate change issue coming forward in 1991. So this was the celebration of 10 years and where are we? And of course we were nowhere. And so then the chairman got up and he said, the leaders here today who say they will take back to their parliaments and ratify Kyoto will go down in history as having saved the world. Okay, so I knew at that point I had lost Mr. Chrétien, that all my arguments why we shouldn't would be for nothing. So John Chrétien came back to Ottawa, put forward a bill to ratify Kyoto. I then went to Stephen Harper, who was the leader at that time
Of the Conservative Party.
of the Conservative Party. And so on a Monday morning, I went into his office and I said, can I have your time? Because the leader of a party has unlimited time. So can I have your time to talk about why we shouldn't ratify Kyoto? And he agreed and said, so how long are you going to go? I said, till Christmas. This was November. This was November, okay? And so he said, well, you can't go till Christmas. You better talk to the Speaker of the House, as Peter Milliken at the time. So I went to Peter Milliken, and he and I become pretty good friends as well. And I said, Peter, I'm going to talk from now till Christmas on Kyoto. He said, well, here are the rules, Bob. You can't repeat yourself. You must stay on topic. You can't stray from your seat more than 6 feet. And, it has to be different. Can't repeat yourself.
And you can't go to the bathroom?
You can't go to the bathroom, and food can be brought to you by a page, but nothing else. I made sure not to ever order water, and because that would have been fatal. And so anyway, I started on Monday morning when the House opened, and introduced myself. I had a page of notes, and of course I'd been at all the COP meetings and I knew all the arguments, and I pretty much knew Kyoto. And so I argued and went. So they extended the House till 7 o'clock, which was really nice of them to accommodate me. Slowly people left the House. And we
To go to the bathroom.
yeah, to do whatever. Anyway, I spoke through, and then so the next day, Tuesday, I started again at 10 in the morning, and went that day, and I hadn't repeated myself or anything, but by that time, all the radio hosts across the country were dealing with the topics that I were raising. We got hundreds of phone calls and emails into our office, agreeing, disagreeing, but you know, dealing
Involved
with it.
in
Involved.
following them.
So yeah. So anyway. So then at night, at 7 o'clock at night, I would go on radio talk shows, and so for half the night, I'm on talk shows about what I talked about that day. And so Wednesday's caucus meeting in the morning. So I went from the afternoon to extended house again.
On day 3.
And then Mike Bullard called and said, "Can you come to Toronto? I want to do a live show with you on my comedy show." I asked Stockwell Day if I could go. He told me I couldn't because I would get trashed. And I said, "Well, I'm going," so I went. Red flag again. And we had a great time. We had a great interview. He started off by saying, "So you're against Toyota?" And I said, "No, it's Kyoto." And we went from there. And I tried to give him as much back as he gave me. And we had a really fun show. Like he really enjoyed it, I really enjoyed it, and our caucus really enjoyed it. And then it started. So by Thursday now, people are saying, well, like most of the MPs have left. They don't want to hear me anymore. And so the comments were, well, how much is this costing? And so, of course, the Liberals were putting out, this is costing millions, while he occupies the time. And so they're trying to build a negative toward, because I'm getting too much attention. And anyway, so the speaker talked to me before and said, "So are you really going till Christmas?" And I said, "Well, I can. I can easily go till Christmas about this topic because I haven't even covered all the clauses yet. I've only covered a few clauses, and there's like hundreds of clauses." And he said, "Oh yeah, I think you probably could go till spring." And but because there were some negatives, I decided I'm going to fool you guys. So at 4 o'clock, I sat down on Thursday, and of course, no one's around. So now, how are we going to handle this? Because everybody's gone home, and so it was interesting. Anyway, Parliament was cancelled for the Friday because I'd sat down, and I think I'd accomplished what I wanted to. That there's reasons why we shouldn't ratify Kyoto. Of course, the vote came the next week. It was passed because, again, there's a whip vote. And all the Conservatives opposed it. The Liberals passed it. And 10 years later, I was asked on CBC for a half-hour show as to now we're out of Kyoto. We were forced out of Kyoto because we didn't achieve any of our targets. How did you know that? And I guess I said, well, you got to think to the future. You got to have a vision. You can't achieve it, don't sign it. And
well, that's like Trudeau's recent dictum or expectations or requirements. Within 24 hours, he was backtracking.
Yeah, you see, that builds a lack of confidence in leadership, lack of confidence in the process. And right today, I mean, it's terrible, the battle between democracy and autocracy. Autocracy is winning. The Chinas, the Russias, the
Parts of the American scene.
parts, yeah, they're winning because of the lack of vision, the lack of real, let's not say things we're going to do when we can't do them. And if we know we can't do them, then, hey, don't talk about it, fix it. And so I mean, that was a fascinating time. It was, I don't know what people thought. I got a letter from the Premier of the province congratulating me as a true Albertan, someone who stood up for what they believed in. And so I got all kinds of, commendations about what I did because they knew I believed it. And of course, I don't want to sound too smart because it turned out I was right, but we should have known that we couldn't do that. And should we deal with climate change? You better believe it. It's a big, big problem, and we all know. But 30 years ago, I talked about climate change, gave speeches on climate change, and probably to Rotary. You probably were at a meeting when I was talking about climate change. And at that point, you sort of sounded like a fanatic. But as now, of course, giving that same speech today, everybody'd say, yeah, we know all that. Yeah, that's right. But it's again, people don't have that vision. Politicians don't have that vision. And that's what they need.
Can we linger a little bit on that? Do I call it a filibuster or?
Sure.
Yeah, certainly an extended speech in terms of it's a benchmark. I recall at the time it was the longest speech ever given in the House of Commons.
In the Commonwealth, actually, yeah. It was. I think it's 990 pages in Hansard or something like that, and so there's a lot. It's all in Hansard and it's all recorded. And the interesting part is that the number of students who have decided to do that as their thesis, to talk about that speech and that, I think a lot of them are in political science and stuff, and the history of that. So I had one girl that was doing her PhD thesis from London University in London, England, and she contacted me many, many times about things I'd said in the speech. Well, like, I don't remember what I said in the speech. And so she brought me back to just, hey, there's somebody actually, like, there's some value in that. And of course, that makes you feel happy too. And so, I think people often say, well, why, what a waste of time. I just wasted my time. I don't think so. If you really believe in something and you carry it out, that's worth something.
Well, I remember feeling a bit ironic. I mean, it was interesting because it was somebody from Red Deer, and because there was a lot of speculation on how long you would go, whether it was Christmas or not. But fortunately, some of it was on the content of what you were saying, and I mean, they were relating it to the different party stands and so on. Mm-hmm. But there was, I think, more attention paid in the country to that week than I recall on any singular topic.
Well, and I also have a plaque that was presented to me by Stephen Harper and signed by Stephen Harper, thanking me for doing that and bringing the attention of the whole climate change issue, that no one had ever really brought that attention before, and that was an achievement. So again, that was done at our caucus meeting, and here's a, and to get that from Stephen Harper, that's meaningful, I think. I don't know if he remembers it. I don't know whether a clerk signed it for him, but again, when I would speak, like when I got some of the awards from the Wildlife Federation and from various environmental groups, it was interesting because I proposed that on 24 Sussex we should put solar panels. And why did I do that? Was because I was in the Parliament of Japan, and the Prime Minister had promoted putting solar panels in his front lawn. And so I sent a letter to Stephen Harper, we should have solar panels, and it will send the right message. That was not a message that the Conservative Party was going to say. And when I would speak in places like Toronto and that, they'd say, well, you're not a Conservative. Like, this is the realm of the other parties, like, to care about the environment. And then I said, so who do you think is the Prime Minister who did the most for the environment? And of course it was Mulroney who did the most environmental legislation of any Prime Minister before or since. And nobody really, recognizes that. But to conserve is a conservative concept. And to me, I wasn't straying from what I believe in. Like, I believe in fiscal responsibility. But I believe if you don't take care of your environment, you're not doing anything for the next generation, and you're certainly not thinking of the future.
You're not conserving the country.
No, and you know, everybody's an environmentalist. If you're a camper, if you're a hunter, if you're a golfer, you care about your environment. So even though you don't think you're an environmentalist, you really are, because you don't want a polluted, dirty, filthy environment to live in. Most people would like something nice to look at. Psychologically, it's good for the health. And so I you know, I don't find environment being any foreign thing. And unfortunately, the other parties haven't proven when they've formed government that they even deal with the environment. So I don't know why you can't be a conservative environmentalist. And yet publicly that's a concept. I give a speech in Spain, and they look at me like, you couldn't have been a conservative. Like, that's not possible. You had to be a socialist. Well, no, actually, socialists haven't done much for the environment, except talk.
Mother Nature doesn't spare any of us.
No, it's just common sense to me.
Bob, can we go back to your political life and some of the other, not just the environment, but some of the other perhaps more minor issues that you were involved in, either from a constituency point of view or a political point of view? Because you remained I think the environment critic, and then
chair of the Environment Committee at the end.
Yeah.
You know, again, I attended environment conferences everywhere and spoke universally. Like, I was in many countries talking about environment. And then I was part of Globe International, which was a British organized environmental concern group of politicians. And it had members from every country, including Russia and China and so on. And I guess a highlight for me was in 2008 being awarded the top environmentalist of the year by Globe International. And I have a world globe and a plaque that I could show you that I'm very proud of, because the president of Japan presented it to me. And you know, it was a big deal at the time to be at an event in Japan and be presented with the World Globe International Award for top environmentalist. And you know, that's the kind of thing, you know, I don't want to sound arrogant, but that's the kind of thing that really makes you feel like, wow, somebody actually listened to me about the environment. And
there was somebody else listening, and it was called the Rotary Club of Red Deer.
Yes.
And although you perhaps weren't directly involved in it, but Glenn Moore and eventually the club got very actively involved in a water project in Uganda and Kenya. It was interesting because it relied on a very old principle that sunlight will sterilize water if you leave it for 2 days. And you have to be near the equator, but the concept was to introduce kids in a family the responsibility of acquiring contaminated water from the nearby swamp or whatever, and then putting it out on a platform to be sterilized by the environment. And the effect of that was remarkable. And I remember Glenn coming back and saying, we had a wing of our composite building, it was a school and whatever else. He said, we've been able to turn the whole wing because there's no more kids coming in sick with diarrhea. We've been able to turn it into a school. And that was just a small community.
Exactly.
But it's that attitude, that willingness, and I must say when Glenn brought the concept to us, it actually became a very significant project in Africa. And there were some international awards that went with it.
Yeah, all you have to do is visit these other countries to see how lucky we are, how fortunate we are. And, you know, I was in refugee camps in Jordan and in Macedonia and all over the world, and you just realize how fortunate we are to have what we have. And, you know, you look at the food, you look at the water contamination that these people deal with. And of course, you know, again, you know, we spend so much time with stupid issues that we should be dealing with things like water. I mean, water is such an important component. You don't have life without water. And so any projects that, and I'm so pleased that Rotary International now has set as one of their 7th main goals is environment. Yeah. And to me, that is common sense to realize that we have to start dealing with these issues. And they're global, they're everywhere. And with Globe International, we did public hearings, and the World Bank sponsored a lot of it. And we went to countries, and 6 or 7 of us would be on the committee, and we would listen to whether it was fisheries, whether it was endangered species, whatever it was, we would listen to those people in the field. Like, listen to the people that are there, that are experiencing the difficulties, and you learn a lot. So we learned a lot from just going to a country and having them tell us, here's our fisheries problem, you know. And when you set, like, really interesting thing, when you set an environment conservation zone in the ocean, and the fish there's no fishing in there, and how big fish grow bigger, and how many eggs a big fish produces compared to a little fish, and how much the population benefits outside of the environmental zone, how many more fish they catch. And for some countries, that's all the protein they get is fish. And so if you can promote these environmental zones, you can increase the fish population dramatically, because you leave big fish producing more eggs. And it's just common sense again. But going to talk to actual fishermen and showing them that causes them to say, hey, we should have these environmental zones. And it's not just about some freaky environmentalist, it's about our living, it's about our life. And so again, you learn so much from being on these international commissions and that. And I'm still sort of involved in doing some of this stuff, but travel gets tougher and tougher. It's not a fun experience anymore going through an airport.
No, especially after Toronto was just identified as the worst airport in the world for getting through.
People used to say, you're so lucky to be able to travel so much. But, you know, as the years went on, flying back to Ottawa for 15 years every Sunday night didn't become that much fun anymore. And especially when you have fog and ice and whatever, and you get diverted to Montreal and get in at 4 in the morning and back at work at 7. It weighs on you. It's very tough for politicians in Western Canada to be, you know, have great attendance and everything. But to me, coming back to Red Deer, and like, there wasn't a Saturday night that we were at home for 15 years because we were at a banquet, sometimes 3 banquets a night. So you'd have the appetizers in Innisfail, you'd have the main course in Red Deer, and you'd do the dessert in Rocky. We did that many times. And in fact, a couple times I even had to have RCMP escorts so I could drive a little faster. and they were fun guys to deal with, because they'd say, well, you got another banquet to be at in wherever. And so the light and me following would get me to that banquet on time. But
well, I mean, you obviously were very disciplined, because it, excuse the pun, it didn't go to waste, particularly your waste.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting time.
Bob, are there any other stories that you'd like to talk about involving some of your local constituents and how, as an MP, you're not just related to them or got their votes, but helped them?
Well, I guess Christmas Day, a family in Caroline were bringing a refugee child into their family, and on Christmas Day I spent the day talking to the embassy in the country, talking to the ministers, you know, just helping them to get this child. And they still send me Christmas cards with the child who's now grown up and so on. And so those kind of personal things. When the tornado hit Pine Lake, not having the military there, I finally ended up on the phone with the Minister of Defense saying, how is it possible that you can't bring people from Edmonton to Pine Lake to help out? How is it possible that you've told them it's going to take 3 days for you to get them there? Like, how is that possible? Like, it's a 2-hour drive, and so we managed to get the military there much quicker than they otherwise, because of course the best method for a politician, I learned quite quickly, is have a list of media contacts. And so as soon as someone tells you you can't, you say, okay, here's my list, here's who I'm calling. And I've sat in the immigration minister's office and said, I brought my lunch and I'm here and I want to talk to the minister, but you don't have an appointment. When can I have an appointment? 2 days, 3 days, or 2 weeks, whatever. No, that's not good enough. I'm here, I got my lunch. Well, when we close at 5 o'clock, we'll have the security come and take you out. Okay, well, tell me when you're going to call security, because here's who I'm calling. And that works just so well. So the minister actually finds time to see you right away. And I have so many cases in Red Deer of constituents who I was able to help. One, a very prominent member of our club, the Rotary Club, and I was able to help them out by that tactic, by sitting in the office and saying, can't see me, I'm phoning. And it was just a magic ticket. A lot of people said, well, that's like, but I got a reputation. And so I pretty soon could walk in and say, I want to see whoever. And I got to see them because they knew I'd pull the same stunt again. And so I know the bureaucrats thought it was quite amazing that I would have the guts to do that. But that's my job. Like, my job is to represent my constituents to whatever I need, whatever they need, and get it dealt with. Like, so don't give me this crap about meetings and stuff. And it worked really well. Like, maybe because of how I dealt with it, I don't know, but it worked well. And I used the media. The media were great to me. I can honestly say for 15 years, I never had one problem with anybody in the media. They treated me just fantastic.
Well, and I guess from a local perspective, you get a lot of positive press one way or another, through contacts, through stories, through actions that you took. I certainly remember when I was having trouble with our son Jeffrey, who was in Turkey, and we couldn't get his passport back. And he was there for a year as a Rotary exchange student, but he didn't have his passport. And I remember going, calling your office, and within a couple of days you came back and said, no, the passport is not being held by the government, it's being held by the Rotary Club. And that gave me the answer as to what I had to do to allow him to be able to travel over there with his passport. But I was terribly appreciative.
Yeah. Well, we just had
what you were able to do to help.
Yeah, so many times, and of course I had great staff. Louise in my office. That was interesting because when we went there in 1993, the Conservatives had been the official opposition and ended up winning only 2 seats, and the Reform Party had 53 seats. And so there were a lot of unemployed staff members. And so I had this sheet, this huge mound of applications for a job. And so I went through them and interviewed them, and I didn't think this person would fit, and I didn't think this person would fit. This person wanted to work, 8 till 5. I knew that wouldn't work with me because I don't work 8 to 5. And so I kept interviewing, and I finally, on the second day, got to my about 28th interview, and it was Louise Kennedy. And I interviewed her, and in 5 minutes I said, "You've got the job." We clicked, bang, right now. And Louise was with me the entire time that I was there, and she stayed on with the present Member of Parliament. And Louise and I are very good friends. She's very good friends with my wife, Nicole. And just a super person. And again, it wasn't a 9 to 5 job for her. It was, when Bob needs me, I'm there. And I couldn't have had a stronger supporter. Somebody says something negative about Bob, man, you're going to deal with Louise right now. like she's on your case, and
sure.
You're going to regret what you said.
Yeah, your right hand.
Yeah, and the other thing, I had interns. I had an intern from Michigan every year. I got to know the instructor from Ann Arbor, and she would phone me and say, "Bob, I've got this student or that student." These students keep in touch with me, and one of them now is the the CEO for the California Governor's Office, in the California Governor's Office. She was a law graduate, and so these students have carried on, they kept contact, and again, I had then a Canadian intern every year as well. Supposed to have one every 3 years, but I made them jump right into the fire. So others would let them file things and stuff like that. Well, I had them working on research projects and writing things. So I ended up with an intern every year, and they were great. I mean, because I could work them 18 hours a day, and they're happy because they're getting the experience. and so Sunday, I'll be back my plane lands at 11. I'll see you at 12. And they were game for that. So
well, it certainly extends you. But what about your Red Deer office? Did you have any prominent people and really effective people that helped you in it?
Oh yeah, just again, they were great because they knew exactly how Bob would deal with it. And
did you have a lady by the name of Tara Veer?
I did, yes, for a very short time, for about a year. And we didn't agree on everything, and it was probably one of my shortest employees. All the rest were with me.
Needless to say, she certainly has left her mark, and went on to become a long-standing mayor of Red Deer.
For sure.
So, rightly or wrongly, the experience benefited her.
Well, and I think so. I think she learned again about dealing with people and how to deal with people, and that's to her credit that she's achieved what she's achieved.
I think I'm wrong saying that the real start she got was looking after our family when she was youngster, because she just lived down the street.
Okay.
But no, well, a lovely person, lovely lady.
Yeah.
Are there any other highlights from your days in the House of Commons that still are issues of today? Or
yeah, I mean, there's so many stories that we could spend a week here talking about the many experiences. I think that the key thing was, again, and I when Parliament closed, when the buildings closed for renovations, I was there for the closing, and I went into the Liberal caucus room, said hello to the people that I remembered from there, went into the NDP caucus room, and Nathan Cullen and I had become friends. He was on the Environment Committee. said hello to him, went back to the Conservative caucus room, and I was, by a new member, said, we saw you going into those other guys' caucus rooms. What are you doing, you traitor? And I said, you know, I'm not a member of any caucus. I have friends in everywhere, and it's about doing what's best for Canada and your constituents. It's not about your party. Like, I don't like parties. And the partisanship that we see in the US, that we see in Canada, there's no room for that. Like, there's good people in every party, there's bad people in every party. And you need to, at times, work together. And on the Environment Committee, you know, Karen Sloan was known as the Viper Lady from the Liberal Party. And she tried that with me as chair, that she would come and, you know, attack me. And within 6 months, we were good friends. And we worked on issues together. We worked on Endangered Species Act. We worked on tankers. Tankers were, or ships were leaving from the harbor in Halifax, dumping their bilge water within a mile of shore. And we got a law put in place that we worked together on. We got a law in place that they can't dump their bilge water, and with certain restrictions and filtration and all that, near Canadian waters. For that, I got an award from the Wildlife Federation for having, you know, really pushed this particular act. So you have to work together on certain issues. There are partisan issues, obviously, where, you know, borrowing money and spending money at will, to me, is a crime against future generations. Someone else would say,
Especially if it's borrowed.
yeah, someone else would say, no, you got to borrow, you got to spend borrowed money to, you know, whatever. I can't buy that. I just don't agree with that. So there are partisan issues, but you shouldn't, like, issues that aren't needing to be partisan shouldn't be partisan, and yet they are. And I mean, if you look at the environmental acts that are being passed in the US, I mean, it's a tragedy how they won't work together, how they literally hate each other, and to the detriment of their country.
Yes, and it's heading the wrong direction, it seems.
Yeah, it sure is. It's, again, the personality complex of some people.
Bob, when you decided not to continue, and I know there was much disappointment in Red Deer that when you announced that you wouldn't run again, not just because it was easy to re-elect you, but, or because you'd won so many times, but because of the impact you'd had. But you did have to look at your own life and what was, you know, important and what were the priorities. So when you decided not to continue, then what were some of the things that you focused on or carried over into your post-MP life?
Well, in 2008, I was named to the National Roundtable on Environment and the Economy. And so from 2008 to 2011, I sat on that committee. We met once a month in Ottawa. And again, we brought in the top scientists in the world to work on climate change issues and how they would affect the economy for the next 50 years. Unfortunately, and a big regret of mine, is that all of those reports, which were excellent reports done by experts, that all of those reports were put into the archives an hour before the University of Ottawa had agreed to have graduate students work on indexing all of the reports and making them open to the public. And to me, that was a huge mistake, that those reports are not there for people to look at, learn from, and use. And because they're very difficult to find now in the archives. And I think students and so on will find it difficult to see them. but we had it broken down province to province to province, the economic effects, the environmental effects, what should be done, what could be done, and done by expert scientists. And so the National Roundtable to me was really important. It was disbanded by the Harper government, and I think that was a huge mistake. And because there were people from all walks of life on it, there were scientists, there were common, just general public, heads of unions, heads of different organizations, academics, and we just did a lot of really good work. And to have it sitting in an archives on a shelf somewhere, to me is a big mistake. And I would hope that somebody has the initiative to dig that stuff out, index it, and turn it over to a university or somewhere where it can actually be used. So that's how I spent my time. And then from there, I became a speaker talking about environmental issues, mainly climate change. And so from 2011 onward, I was asked to speak at various places. Usually it was a fly-in, see the venue, do the speech, go back to the hotel, fly home. And so it was, some of those trips were very long. Like quite often they were 14 hours, 20 hours of flying.
A short speech.
In a 20-minute, 40-minute speech. The most interesting one I gave was in China, I guess, with a huge crowd. And I was in a stadium, and I was the only guy on the stage. I thought I should have a band or something, but I was there by myself.
You weren't speaking Mandarin, though, were you?
No, 7 languages translated. And so my one stipulation when I give a speech is I must have a question period. I won't go if it's just a speech, because I want to hear what people have to say. Unlike Al Gore, who doesn't allow questions at most of his things. So to me, that then you don't really know whether you've hit the nail on the head or not. And so anyway, this speech I was to go 20 minutes. I ended up going 40. And then I said, okay, questions. And they had mics set up. And 2.5 hours later, I'm still answering questions. And a girl comes out on the stage and hands me a piece of paper and said, how long are you going to go? The lights are costing us X number of yuan an hour, and how long are you going to go? I got the message that it was about time to stop the questions, and so that was an interesting event. And I found speaking to a group of students in Guilin. These were students at a university gym, and I'm giving a speech on climate change, and I asked for questions. A girl stood up and she said, I'm 18. My grandparents have emphysema. My parents are coughing and choking a lot. I quite often can't see the streetlights when I go home because of the air pollution. Our soil is polluted. I'm 18 years old, a first-year student. What can I do? I live in a country of 1.3 billion people. What can I do? And I said to her, you've got to tell your politicians that it will come back to haunt them, and they should remember 1949 and the Great Revolution in China. And if they don't listen, that could happen to them. I have Communist Party members behind me because they attend everybody that speaks internationally. They're so, of course, they debrief you after. So what did you mean by that? Remember, I've been going to China since 1979. So I'm considered an old friend, if you want, not a new, and not an American. So anyway, what did you mean?
You're a modern day Bethune.
Yeah. I said, well, what I meant was the environment will be very important, and it's obviously important to that 18-year-old girl. And they said, well, we care about the environment. And from there on, I like they really let me say whatever I wanted, as long as I didn't talk government, anti-government or something, but I could say whatever I wanted. And so about 8 years later, I got a phone call asking me to go to Beijing. And I went to Beijing, and I had agreed that I would go. They had a ticket for me in Calgary, and I went and, went to Vancouver, flew to Beijing. The next morning, I go to the People's Congress. And by the way, I was one of the first round eyes, which is what they referred to us as, to attend the People's Congress in March and actually see the process and understand the process of the Politburo and how it works and so on. But anyway, so I get taken to this magnificent office, and it turns out that he's a member of the Politburo. And he said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No," because I didn't recognize him. And he said, I was in Guilin. Do you remember the little girl that stood up?" I said, "Yeah." She asked some interesting questions. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Guess what I am now? I'm the environment minister." And so I said, "You got to find that little girl, because she has an impact on you." And she asked that question, "What can I do?" She did a lot, because you're here. You're one of the top 7 guys in this country, and you can make a difference about the environment. And that's what she did. And he said, how would I find that student? Like, I to this day don't think he probably did, but so you look at those kind of things and you say, wow, like that little girl standing up and being brave enough to ask that question.
It's like that young girl from Sweden.
Yeah. It's but
sometimes you just don't know.
No, you don't know
As a teacher.
Yeah, because the guys behind me, I mean, they weren't very happy with my answer. You could tell. I mean, this isn't something that they're used to hearing. Talk to your politicians. But hey,
it's a benchmark here in China's history,
Yeah.
as we know.
Yeah, well, no, and now I'm afraid they've slipped back into some of their old ways, but then who hasn't?
Ouch, true. Bob, do you want to just go over a little bit about your interest in garbage disposal and how that's turned out?
Well, yeah, I became so interested in like landfills. To me are a time bomb. Leachate is going to seep out into the environment. Methane is coming off. Methane's 28 times worse than CO2. You've got to deal with this garbage problem around the world. It's everywhere. It's in our oceans. It's everywhere. You've got to deal with garbage. And so what was a good way? Well, there was this company in Ottawa, Plasco it was called at the time. It's changed names now. But they developed a technology to turn 99.9% of garbage into usable materials based on gasification. 700 degrees Celsius, and you could turn garbage into usable materials. So I said, well, why don't we try a sample place like Red Deer? They said, well, see what you can do. I went to the county council, and Earl Kinsella was the chairman at that point, and he said, yeah, we got a garbage problem. So we went town to town to town in the county of Red Deer. They were 100% on side. Went to the city of Red Deer many times and said, we need 20% of your garbage to make a volume enough for a test plant to be built in Red Deer. The county will provide the site. All you need to do is give us 20% of your garbage. The city came back and said, we'll give you 10%. There was the mayor at the time and one councillor particularly didn't think it was such a good idea. What if it's a white elephant? What if it doesn't work? Well, there's $200 million of private money going into it. They'll be the losers. Oh yeah, but we'll get a bad reputation. No, you won't. You'll get the world coming to see a gasification plant working in a community. I now have been in touch with them a month ago. They now are called Omni Conversion Technology, and they are selling the technology to companies that are going to recycle garbage. The first plant is going to be built in Canada in Hamilton. It could have been Red Deer. The next plant is being built in Los Angeles. Could have been Red Deer. There are many plants in China, many plants being introduced in Europe. Could have been Red Deer that led this 20 years ago. Is it a disappointment? You better believe it. Do I have hard feelings? Yeah, I really do. We could have been leaders. We could have shown the world how you don't have to have landfills. What's the best fuel for conversion? Plastic. Plastic is the very best. It's all carbon, and you turn it into its carbon base, and you produce whatever you want with it. Produce steel.
Is that a byproduct, you mean, of the gasification process?
Yeah, gasification turns everything into its molecular base, and then the process, the technology, recombines. And it's just such a great technology, and it's using this high temperature to break down this garbage, and then you don't have to have a landfill. And in 40% of garbage is water, so you can recover that water. You use reverse osmosis, and you have pure water. Most people wouldn't like to drink the water from garbage, but you use it for golf courses or whatever, for gray water. In China, going to put it into their domestic water supply. And again, autocracy, they don't have to do public hearings. And you know, so you don't have landfills anymore. And who likes a landfill? Like, a landfill is a ticking time bomb for stuff to leak out and go into the air. You just gotta stop landfilling. So am I passionate about garbage? You better believe it. Like, it's one of our worst environmental problems because we produce so much of it.
Yeah, we could.
And we could have had people, the world coming to see us.
Unfortunately, that day's passed, and others have picked it up.
Others have picked it up. That's the sad part.
Bob, can I just slip into a short chat about our background here, Slack Slough? You want to quickly summarize that remarkable opportunity you've afforded the Rotary Club?
Well, it started really with 2012. The county came up with a plan of what areas are sensitive, environmentally sensitive. Slack Slough was one of them. Then the Alberta government came up with an environmental plan about preserving wetlands. And then the County of Red Deer put forward and voted on and approved a Gasoline Alley East plan. The Gasoline Alley East plan set aside the quarter sections along Mackenzie Road as industrial. That included Slack Slough in the parts that would be industrial, from Highway 2 going east. As soon as I saw that, I thought, you know, they could drain that. They could turn it into a, strip mall right on the highway. 122,000 cars a day go past it. 11,000 cars go on Mackenzie Road a day. And we have over 10,000 geese use Slack Slough in the fall. We have sandhill cranes. We have swans. We have 96 species of birds, plus a lot of plants, reptiles, and so on. Wouldn't it be nice to preserve that as a wetland and teach people about the importance of water? And so guess who owns the land south of Slack Slough? And we're looking at it. And so if this were to become a preserved area for future generations, and we had a training center there and so on, wouldn't that be a good legacy for the citizens of Red Deer, for the province, for the country, to be able to say how important water is going to be and is for industry, for everything. And so Rotary had a project of 100 years, and 100 years in Red Deer. And so 2023 is the 100th anniversary. So they said, we will raise $1 million. We said we'd raise $1 million for a project that would be a legacy for the Rotary Club. And so out of that came the Rotary Wetland Education Center. And of course, the 17 projects were put forward, and Rotary members chose this project as the legacy project. Where it's at now is we're moving along. Ducks Unlimited will start work on the lower part in this fall. As soon as the crop's off, they're going to start work. And from there, we, of course, hope to get trails established and get viewing platforms, and ultimately, hopefully, a building where education can go on to teach people about the importance of wetlands, water, and the future. So that's kind of in a nutshell the project, and Rotary's been very supportive. The County of Red Deer has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of their support, and there's all kinds of donors out there who are ready to get on side, and it's just a matter of getting joining piece
getting
of
the
land,
site, securing
getting
the site.
secured. Yeah, so it will be an environmental area, and the county hopefully, will stay on site and administer it and run it and so on. So it will be a future type expansion. Probably you and I won't see the full development, but at least that will be something for future generations.
I go back to my father's original attachment to Slack Slough, and I would never have believed that. It must be 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I said to the club, it takes a while to put these great ideas in place. It takes vision and discussion and focusing to even get them started, let alone raise the funds, money, and interest that's required. I'm just ecstatic the way that it's turned out.
Well, yeah, and the chairman, Gloria Beck, is just doing a great job of keeping the interest there and keeping the work going.
Yeah, I keep prodding her at each meeting.
Well, she is working. I guarantee you she's working.
I just find it fascinating that's Earl Beck's daughter, of course, and that's full circle.
Yeah. Well, Earl was certainly a major part of our community, and of course started the Parkland Nursing Nursery and worked at Mitchell Center, and so again, a great person, a great citizen of Red Deer.
Yeah, and so are the Becks. Hopefully they'll join you in an interview, and as I carry on with this.
Sure.
What's turning out to be a remarkable set of stories. I'm just delighted. I have an old phrase that if Red Deer has no history because it's so young, and if it doesn't capture that as it passes through, it'll lose it too. But these stories have been remarkable and created, even to me, a vision of Red Deer that I hadn't seen in many ways, and a rationale as to how it's grown, the people who've come to it, the people who've contributed to it, and the people who've taken that, what I call it, Alberta enthusiasm, and turned it back to the country in a positive way.
And I think, you should take credit as well for consolidating this, because I've often thought, a lot of these stories are gone. And even this book that our daughter's working on, it wouldn't have happened probably without your prodding of her to prod me to start putting some of this down in writing. And I think it's important to have this in the archives, and that's where I hope a lot of these stories will end up. Certainly not just me, but of all these people that are played such a part in developing. When I came here, Red Deer was 18,000 people. And so it's, changed a lot, grown a lot, and will grow a lot in the future. And so it's very important that this history be there and for future generations. Then hopefully they'll carry on to add to it as things change.
Bob, nice note to almost close on. Would you like to say anything about your family, and particularly at least the one portion of it that you shared with the club by having Melinda, when she's here, come and chat with us? But just a brief note, knowing that she's a graduate of Red Deer, and has done it remarkably well.
Well, again, we've been very fortunate. We're a blended family. Nicole's 3 kids. One's a nurse at Michener long-term care facility. Another one works for the BC government in Victoria and is very high in their accounting department and tax collection. And the other one lives on the island and is a businessman. My family, we have Ken, who's the oldest. He was a Rhodes Scholar, I think, along with Roland Michener, maybe the second Rhodes Scholar from Red Deer. Sure. And he attended Oxford and then taught at Princeton, and is now in Ann Arbor, Michigan as a senior historian. And he specialized in South American history and can tell you anything that happened in the 16th century in Peru, down to the names of the friars and their influence in the country. So he knows an awful lot about South American history. Carrie Ann is an architect. She works in Red Deer. She's part of Group 2 architectural firm, and works very hard at that. And the youngest, Melinda, she attended Edmonton, called me one day and said, there's a Dutch guy here who wants to give me a scholarship to go to Groningen in the Netherlands, and they'll pay all my tuition and pay an air ticket back to Red Deer once a year. I said, don't let him out of your sight, sign right now. and she did, and she went to Groningen. She graduated with distinction there, cum laude, and then from there went to Germany. Worked.
What would be her specialty or focus?
Her specialty
at that time?
was in sociology, and at that time, and she worked in demographics and that whole field. From there, she's gone on into genetics, and so now I guess is a double graduate, and now she phoned again. She likes phoning to get advice, which is unusual, I think. But anyway, she phoned and said, I have 2 offers. I have an offer at Max Planck Institute, just out of Berlin, and I'll be a head of the department there, or I can go to Oxford and be a senior scientist. And so, of course, we were pulling for Oxford because it's easier to get to, and that's not the whole reason. But anyway, so she accepted the job at Oxford. Her employment is to the age of 78, and she can extend that beyond that. And many of the people in Oxford do teach or work in science till they're in their 90s. It's very interesting. She has many 90-year-old friends. But anyway, and from there she kind of majored in the whole area of genetics and population effects. and most recently has been working on the whole mRNA and the how to deal with COVID. And so she brings in about, she was just here, she brings in around $30 million to the university for her research. And so she's a very, been very successful. She travels an enormous amount. She travels more than I did, and speaks all over the world about COVID, most recently about COVID, but more other than that about populations and genetics in populations. And I went to one of her lectures. It's interesting because I went to one of her lectures and she was speaking in Ottawa, and I was there, and I went to one of her lectures, and the lady beside me said, "That was really good. That was some new stuff." I said, "Oh yeah, it's really good stuff." I understood about 5% of what she was talking about because it was a lot of statistical analysis. I didn't understand any of it. And then I got a chance to listen to my son do a speech on a friar at 1605 in Peru, and he made it alive. He talked like he was the friar in his speech, and it was fascinating. I thought he would be equal to Melinda in terms of speeches, but he wasn't. I understood all of his, and it was like being there. It was quite phenomenal. And so yeah, I'm really proud of the kids. They've all done really well, and yeah, they're doing something for the world, I guess, which is great.
I haven't talked to her, which is always just such a treat when she comes to our club meetings. But there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done genetically when you realize that 80% at least of our chromosomes are common to animals and others that we've grown up from. And that's, there's a lot of research that needs to be done on that.
And that's what she's doing basically, is mapping the chromosomes and of course increasing the understanding of how we deal with disease, and so there's just so much, and I'm first to admit that I don't totally understand everything that she talks about, but she is able to, I guess I'd call it, dumb it down so that we can understand what she's talking about. And even, of course, she did a Zoom call to the Rotary Club this past winter, and was able to talk about COVID in a much more human way than what we usually hear about. So
yeah, she's been, I think, an advisor to the government, amongst other things.
She's advisor to the EU, and she's a senior advisor to the British government on how to deal with COVID and what to do and so on, and is somewhat frustrated with politicians and political parties and how they don't listen to scientists, but that's another story. She maybe learned that from me.
Well, this has just been such a treat to go over what will eventually, I'm looking forward to reading in detail and seeing it completed, but there are, in our family, we've done a book and we're already into the second generation. I'm just ecstatic to see that at least you're started.
Well, you motivated her to get going, and that's where she's at today. And her biggest problem is getting the work done from her father. That's where she's having the biggest problem.
I'm sure you'll like you did with your speech, you'll finish it, and you'll finish it in fine form.
Yeah.
Bob, it's been a great treat.
Well, thanks so much, Bob.
To chat and just go over some of the highlights, fill in some of the blanks, and it's been a remarkable story. It's been a remarkable life and well led.
Well, no, I feel very fortunate. Yeah.
Congratulations, and as I say to some of my friends, it's sometimes hard to have a book written like this because the story's not over. And anyway, what great treat.
Yeah, great.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Bob.
Thanks, both of you.